You brought a lawsuit against your doctor claiming that he was careless and that his carelessness caused you injury. And during the course of your lawsuit, you are asked to give testimony in a pretrial deposition. And the first question that the defense lawyer asks you is, Mrs. Jones, when was the last time you had sex? And you're like, what? What did you say to me? Are you crazy? Do you have to answer that question? You want to know the answer? Come join me for a moment on this beautiful walk as I share with you the answer to that question. Hi, I'm Gerry Oginski. I'm a New York medical malpractice and personal injury attorney. Is that shocking? Is that question shocking? Well, if you bring a lawsuit and you bring your spouse into the lawsuit, and as a result of the damages, the injuries you are claiming in the case, you now say, hey, because this doctor was careless and caused me harm and injury, I suffered significant pain. I suffered significant injury. And part of those injuries have affected my relationship with my spouse. Well, guess what? If you bring your spouse into the case, and now you're claiming that your relationship with your spouse has been affected, then guess what? The defense attorney is well within their right to turn around and ask you those questions about sex. Yes. When have you last had sex? How many times did you have sex? Before this incident happened, how often did you and your spouse have sex? What type of sex? What positions were you able to achieve? You're thinking, what is this? This is ridiculous. This is a case about the doctor being careless, right? Absolutely. It's a case about his carelessness. It's also a case about that carelessness causing you harm. But once you allege that you suffered physical harm and injury, now the defense lawyer is entitled to probe and to examine whether or not the injuries really are significant and permanent. And in addition to your injuries, they're also entitled to ask you questions about the injuries that you and your spouse suffered. And that could be emotional, it could be psychological, it could also be sexual. And asking questions about sexual relationship is always appropriate where you bring a claim for your spouse that's known as loss of consortium. And that means that you and your spouse's relationship has suffered, both on an emotional level as well as on a physical level. Now, if you feel uncomfortable answering those questions, the defense lawyer is going to come right out and say, listen, I don't have to ask you these questions if you don't bring that part of the claim. So if you're willing to disregard that part of the claim, then I don't have to ask you those embarrassing questions. And you should know that many times the defense lawyer actually apologizes to the injured patient and says, listen, I'm sorry, I have to ask you some really uncomfortable questions about your sexual history and your sexual relationship with your spouse. And so you have to make a decision in your own mind as to whether or not you're willing to answer those questions. Because if you're not, then you cannot maintain a claim of loss of services for your spouse. But then you're thinking, wait a second, but your spouse helped you do so many things after you were injured. They stayed home from work. They stayed with you night and day to take care of you. And yes, that's understandable. But did your relationship suffer? What was your relationship like before? Did you have an intimate relationship? And how has it been affected as a result of the injuries you received? So you, together with your attorney, have to seriously answer the question about whether you are comfortable answering those questions, because I guarantee you they will come up. And now you might be thinking, wait a second, how are they ever going to know for sure whether or not what I'm saying about our sexual history is correct? Well, if you or your spouse has ever mentioned something to one of your treating doctors about your sexual relationship or your own ability to have or not have sex, then now there's going to be some type of documentation in your medical records that are either going to confirm or contradict what you are now telling this defense lawyer. And that's the whole goal. The defense lawyer wants to get information from you to lock you into your testimony to see whether or not you have contradicted yourself, because they'll be getting those records if they haven't gotten them already. So let's go back to the question I raised in the title of this video. Can the defense attorney turn to you at the very beginning of this deposition or at any point during the question and answer session known as a deposition and say, Mrs. Jones, how many times a week do you have sex now? And before you got injured, how many times a week did you have sex? The answer is, yes, he can. As long as you've brought a claim for your injuries being affecting you and your spouse because of what was done wrong to you by this careless doctor. You know, I realize you're watching this video because you likely have questions or concerns about your own matter. Well, if your matter did happen in New York and you're thinking about bringing a lawsuit, but have not done so yet because you still have questions that need to be answered, what I invite you to do is pick up the phone and call me. You know, I answer questions just like yours, and I'd love to talk to you. You can reach me at 516-487-8207 or by email at Gerry, Gerry, at oginski-law.com. That's it for today's video. I'm Gerry Oginski. Have a wonderful day.